fear of not being good enough, fear of not being lovable are some of the most powerful drivers for human behavior. Die by suicide because they can't see a way to live. They have a difficulty seeing any type of hope or thinking that they are able to overcome what they are going through in that moment. So if we can ensure that people do not feel alone and feel truly heard and seen.
Some of the brightest minds of our generation and around the world working at these large tech companies to make this technology, these algorithms, as addictive as possible.
For a longer amount of time, right? So we know that attention span has been really going down. People can't read anymore, can't read long articles or full books. They use resumes or ChatGPT to tell them what it is without going deeper, without checking the references.
And if you want different results, you have to do things differently. Simple in theory, difficult in practice. So we can either continue to live in this unfair world and do nothing about it, or we can address things in a way where it doesn't feel fair, but at least it leads to healing and growth and progress. I tell my patients, you know what the number one goal of coming to the hospital is? Leaving the hospital. You want to know what's the number one goal of coming to the doctor? Not needing the doctor. No one wants to have to need a therapist or a doctor. Even if they're in the position that they really want one, they don't want to be in the position to really want one. So,
welcome to the Digital Wellness Podcast. Thanks for joining today. Today we have a very special guest, Stephen Mateka, joining us to have a discussion about youth mental health and resilience. Dr. Mateka is a board-certified child and adolescent psychiatrist and has a lot of insights to share, as well as a real love for education and awareness on those topics. And welcome, Steve.
Thank you, Christian. I think you described it perfectly.
And we have also Mark, who's joining us from Germany. Marc Ritter is our AWE co-founder, therapist, neuroscientist, and also has a lot to share on the topic. Let's perhaps start with a general question on what you're seeing, Steve, in the youth mental health trends for the last few years. What's going well? What could be better? You were saying that there were sicker and sicker kids coming in with an overwhelmed system.
It does seem to be the case. And the research supports that. As we've seen the fallout from the COVID-19 pandemic, it put a significant strain on our system, as well as the caregivers of kids and teens. Talk about the good news is that the destigmatization around mental health really accelerated. It became something where everyone knows somebody, if not themselves, who was struggling at some point in time. Unfortunately, the unintended consequence of that was creating quite the significant gap between then supply and demand. And what we are seeing from a child and adolescent perspective is a lot of kids and teens that are getting very overwhelmed and not having access to the services that they need quickly enough. So it further decompensates, and that will naturally have a negative impact on their family unit, where they're still trying to just deal with their own daily life stressors while also managing someone that needs a lot of support and help. So it seems that the downstream effect has left us with more and more children with much higher acuity needs and desperately in need of help and intervention.
Yeah, so the good thing is that there is less stigma. We can talk more openly about some mental health or wellness. I think people sometimes actually it's a badge of honor to have a psychologist or psychiatrist. It can be cool, but in reality, we don't want us to get to that point. We are actually trying with those podcasts, with those articles that you and our team are also writing, give more awareness so that we can actually prevent the badder case and figure out how to do some more prevention. What are some of the ways that you've seen, Steve, that we can help awareness and prevent and educate in a meaningful way?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head, Christian. It's about primary, secondary prevention tactics, because as an inpatient child adolescent psychiatrist, I deal with the most acute cases when children and teenagers are imminently dangerous to themselves, others, or property. So by the time that they get to me, that snowball's already rolling down the hill. And it's quite fast and it's getting quite large. So as far as then what makes the most sense is you go preventative. It seems like the only logical answer of where our systems need to start channeling their resources. And my pie in the sky vision would be mental health is a part of every type of academic curriculum. And I recognize, as you had mentioned, like the whole badge of honor that yes, kids and teens, their number one job is to form an identity and figure out who they are. An unhealthy identity is better than none at all. So it certainly does run the risk of a person identifying with that sick role. However, that risk versus the benefit of being able to understand internal experiences, being able to speak it, articulate it, and then having the village around the person also being able to recognize it. We know that children work and live in systems. It's not just what's happening in the home environment. So if you're having improved recognition, awareness, and education where they are, then it only is more likely that we will see intervention happen sooner. And we have plenty of research that supports when it comes to mental illness, the longer something goes untreated, the worse outcomes are more likely, the worse prognosis. So that would be ideal to me. And having the resources and funding to have mental health education and treatment where the kids are. Because by the time they get to a psychologist or a psychiatrist, they have then cleared many, many steps that have proven to be ineffective to meet their needs. So I'm always big on meet them where they are. And they're in the schools. So that would be a number one place for me.
The school education curriculum, doesn't address those issues, I think, in a comprehensive way. Anywhere in the world today, we're still talking about there's less stigma, but there's no tools or solutions, right? So we talked about the bad, but there is some optimism. We have better tools now. We have better awareness on what's working, what positive reinforcement can work. And I love the fact that you're also thinking about the holistic system where it's not just the child or the team, it's the family. And it's not just the family, it's the community, it's the school, it's the peers. And thanks for bringing that awareness to the table. And can you share some of the initiatives that you might be working on a local or national level in the US? Concerning this?
Certainly. So when it comes to education and looking for mental health information for kids and teens, the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry is a great resource, and they feature many public-facing documents to help families best understand an array of topics involving child and adolescent psychiatry. There are also resources like medication guides as well. So ACAP is the acronym goes, is been consistently invested and dedicated to not just producing and disseminating evidence-based research, but also recognizing it needs to be public-facing for families, because they're trying to do their best with what they have. And that's really what the focus is right now, as well as ensuring that information that's being presented in other areas of society that speaks on child and adolescent mental health diagnoses, treatments, that accurate evidence-based information is being disseminated, and also not hesitating to speak up when appropriately, when feel that the science and evidence is being threatened.
We're also here to educate and accompany and families. One of the things that we've been seeing is that, there are some initiatives working in schools in Europe and Canada and in the US that are maybe a bit outdated. For instance, we see that some schools are being told program about parental control in terms of phone and screen use. And they're saying you should control your child's phone use and monitor it. But in reality, we're finding that that's a poor method that, teens will rebel against that, will find ways across the password. We interviewed someone, a neuroscientist that is now successful, but struggled for addiction for years and was waking up in the middle of the night, finding the iPod of the family, the tablet, and spending 2-3 hours not sleeping, binging social media. Have you had some case where limit setting is not really the adequate response to trying to guide perhaps teens or even younger children in a positive way and have some better coping mechanism than just being on social media?
Absolutely. And I think it's not just like black and white in regards to limit setting. I think it requires a lot of context and circumstances to best appreciate it. So for instance, when a parent is limit setting with reactively, without giving the child the expectations, the awareness of if this, then the limit. There is a place that the child is much more likely to defy that limit, as well as if the parent or caregiver is not taking the time to try to understand where the child is coming from, taking the approach of curiosity, empathy, understanding without judgment. It doesn't mean that you have to agree, obviously, with what the child is saying, but it gives you the chance to best understand why does that child so desperately and badly want to be on on social media or on their screens, because we know it's offering some type of benefit in some way, shape, or form. So if you can take the time to understand the why behind the child's desire for it, then it's much more likely that you will be taking a more collaborative approach, and they would be more agreeable with appropriate limit setting. As working in hospitals for kids in crisis, it is very common for me to be treating youth that presented to the hospital after a really severely dysregulated episode because they had to get off their screen, or their reaction to what's happening on their screen, usually most likely in regards to video games, but also happening with things like group chats, Discord servers, things of that nature. And guaranteed way to get especially a teenager, not to do something is tell them to do it. Without questions asked, without taking the time to appreciate where they're coming from. When you treat a child like a person with respect and dignity, you'd be surprised how much more cooperative and understanding they can be.
Totally agree. And we're talking about teens, but we had a recent event in Montreal, a live event, where I spoke about a situation with a 6-year-old that was in a party with kids, and adults were talking. The kids were playing on their phones. And when the battery ran out, no one knew what to do. They did not know how to play with each other. And this 6-year-old started to bang his head on the wall because his cell phone was dead, right? So when we talk about reactivity, irritability, those are things that I'm sure you see and parents see, and that can be prevented, hopefully. Right?
Yeah, you're right. It certainly is not relegated to only teenagers. And, you bring up another point as far as how do people interact with each other when the screen is not available. And though obviously a 6-year-old at this time, it doesn't exactly apply to that person, but the COVID pandemic, again, these lockdowns, they took away a lot of formative years for forming peer connections and learning how to navigate the world and navigate distress. We know that for kids, and as they get older, there's nothing more important to them than peer connection. It's why there's the whole classic, all of a sudden it seems like I don't really matter that much. That's like with the older kids. But again, like to the younger, if you're not having the opportunity to interact with other children, and then you don't want to, I'm not here to blame a caregiver, because we're all just trying to do the best we can with what we got. So if you're in a situation where you don't have the bandwidth to be able to take the time to teach that, to model that, or to just allow for that environment, it's easy to appreciate then how maybe the road to hell becomes paved with good intentions, because they're just trying to provide for their family and for that child, but in the same instance are actually not preparing them for the next phases of life.
Thanks, Steve. And Mark, do you want to talk a bit about digital pacifier and how have you seen parents use tablets and phone perhaps in the wrong way?
At this beautiful resort with palm trees, beach, and there was a pregnant mother with her child, and the child was screaming, right? And it seemed like she needed some outlet or some pacifier herself. So she actually gave the phone to the kid, who was probably like 5 or 6. And then I looked at what she was doing on her phone. She was scrolling on TikTok on the reels as well. So it's used on both sides, right? As a pacifier essentially. And I think the parents are burned out, or as you said, Dr. Mateka, not even equipped, right? To be in a position to be the caregivers in that context. It seems like this definitely strains the relationship between the parents and the children. And if I think 20 years ago, when we didn't have smartphone technology as ubiquitous as it is today, whether you would be forced in that position to actually pay attention to your child, and what the long-term effects, what are the outcomes of this, sort of parenting on the children, right? So it's a lot more common than we think.
I fully agree with you. And when we talked about the education, again, it speaks to, it's not just for the kids with the appropriate tools necessary to recognize and meet their child's needs, but also like for their own. One of the classic things I will say is that it's a lie that you can't help anyone else without helping yourself. Like, you absolutely can help others without helping yourself. However, you're not going to be able to do it for as long as you want to, or to the best of your ability. And in that case, as you had mentioned, Mark, it was about that the parent needed their own outlet. They needed their own breath and moment of what wellness looked like to them. Now, granted, maybe that scrolling was just to avoid and detach and dissociate from the reality in the moment. But I think with moderation, it's social media, it's Obviously, it's ubiquitous. It's everywhere. So I don't think it's all bad when it's being utilized for true moment of decompression or relaxation. But as you mentioned, when it turns into the go-to of I feel distress, so I'm going to escape, that's when we know that just because you're escaping, it doesn't make the issue go away. And then the concern becomes, okay, are we going to address this issue on my terms where I'm willing to confront, process, problem solve of why I feel I need to escape in the first place? Or am I going to continue to just push it aside until basically it like eats me alive from the inside out and then comes out exploding in a way that I would not want it to. And then you get much dire and undesired consequences.
Yeah, thanks to both of you. I think, we talked again about holistic approach. It's not just one person, one behavior. It comes from many things. And there is this misconception. We looked at some recent study where, everyone's complaining that Gen Z is too much on their phone but in fact, millennials are actually checking their phone more often, right? So it's the parents also that are there, that are doing this, and children model, right? And sometimes maybe the parents are using their phone for work or for grocery shopping or for practical reasons, like you mentioned, intention, right? So social media and the internet or technology is not bad per se. It's all around us. But it's to use it with intention and also communicate with our peers in a relationship. Yes, I'm using this for this purpose. I'm not distracted. I'm doing this with attention, and I will be there with you to give you a full attention and play with you. And so I think this is disconnect that's missing on how we're using it and how we're communicating, how we're creating healthy boundaries and communication about screen time.
Yes. And just for the sake of the audience, like none of us are infallible. Like there are certainly times where I'm giving my son a bath and I'm getting calls from work that are urgently need to be answered. And as I'm taking that call, can rest assured some splashing in the tub starts picking up more than usual, because again, it's the child just doing their best to ensure that they're getting their need met of connection seeking with their parent. So you can imagine, like you said, if you're not approaching this with intentionality, being able to communicate that to the child in ways that they would understand, you run the risk of that becoming a learned behavior that you don't, and I don't blame the kid one bit. Their job is to figure out how to get their needs met. If they learn that if they become defiant or dysregulated and it gets them your connection, then they've learned that's what works. So they would be incentivized to continue to do that. We also know that things that are reinforced on an interval ratio schedule are the hardest type of behaviors to extinguish. So it's like thinking of the slot machine. Like, I don't know, I hit the jackpot once. I'm going to keep pulling it because this might be the time that it hits again. So then that also speaks to the importance of the consistency for the parent. Because if you're only doing it sometimes or only giving in sometimes, then in the child's mind, it's always going to be, well, maybe this time it'll work. Maybe this time it'll work. If you are though then consistent, then you're communicating to that child, this is no longer going to be an effective strategy, and we need to do something differently to get what you want.
So true. And in neuroscience, we know about the dopamine reward circuit and how the slot machine is what the brain loves. That's why, gambling is so prevalent, and it's not just gambling for money. Everything is, as it's more aleatory, people are reinforcing that behavior. Mark, would you have any example of clients that you saw that might exhibit some of those behavior?
Yeah, absolutely. I recently spoke with a client who actually has pornography addiction. And, Dr. Mateka, you spoke a lot about maladaptive ways to get your needs met, right? Through certain modes of behavior, and how this repetition formulates these habits over time. And so what this client actually mentioned to me was that he feels unworthy of a partner. He feels disgusted with his own behavior, that not just normal pornography, but going into these sex chat rooms, and he can't open up to anyone. And so why would anybody want to be with me, right? I'm unlovable. And the only way for him to fulfill that need for love and connection is by going on these sex chat rooms, right? And as messed up as it is, I try to reassure him that this behavior is not due to him being broken or some deficit in his brain, but rather that this is a consequence of habits that have been solidified over time in an attempt to meet one of these core needs of love and connection that he's feeling, right? So my question for you, Dr. Mateka, is what sort of needs do you think are being met maladaptively by children who are on their phone, social media all day long, what sort of deeper needs do you think could be met that's similar to what the why question that you were alluding to before from the parents?
So I'll start with saying I absolutely agree with your conceptualization of how you described your patient, because especially from a cognitive behavioral therapy standpoint, those core dysfunctional beliefs of fear of not being good enough, fear of not being lovable are some of the most powerful drivers for human behavior. So I think it's great that you have the ability to take the behavior and recognize what it is a manifestation of instead of judgment on the behavior in and of itself. And that's really the approach that I take with kids and teens as well, is like, okay, help it make sense. I believe everything makes sense. Just do I have the information available to me for that to be the case? And when it comes to the age of children that would be most likely having a lot of that access to screens and social media, you talk about, and it's two things I've alluded to, that one, there is nothing more important than pre-adolescent, adolescent, than connection with peers and peer approval. So I think in one regard, that is very much so is what is being met. And that's where their cohort are located, is online. And on top of that, as I mentioned, developmental milestones, they don't stop with, like toddlerhood. It doesn't stop at learning how to walk, talk, be potty trained. Developmental milestones occur across the lifespan, just show up in different ways. And those preteens and adolescents, as I mentioned, they're looking to form their identity. And you get to swipe through a lot of things online to figure out what makes the most sense for you and where you feel like you fit in. And maybe it's not even because of your personal preference. Maybe you get the external validation by some type of peers to say, oh, we like that, which means we like you. So then naturally the child's going to continue to lean into those things. And then we see the type of what feels like at times literally life and death scenarios around posts on social media and likes and comments, because it's not about the actual post or comment. It's about that is being allowed to define the person in the child's eyes, that this is who I am. If I get likes, I am good enough. If I do not, I am not good enough. And then, as we mentioned, that leads to a slippery slope of what do you need to do to feel that. So it's pretty natural for teenagers to seek that external validation. And we know that when someone's decision making is based off of what you think someone else may want, it is a pretty fertile ground to start compromising the values, the morals, the life lessons that your caregiver had been teaching throughout the lifespan up until that point.
Yeah, that reminds me of the British Netflix series Adolescent, who depicts some teenagers on social media who actually, feel that, and then they become dysregulated, have some actions and behavior that are based on those real feelings that they're looking for this connection. And, Mark has asked before, what does that do to preteens and teens? And we now know from research actually from University of Montreal that did a longitudinal study of 15 years of saying, what is the average screen time you have at 15 years old versus 25 and 30? And there is some correlation, right? So as soon as you're starting the process, you're creating those behavior, and you might become, a porn addict like Mark is talking about, or social media. We know that the greatest cause of death for people under 40 is suicide, right? So mental health has real consequences, and would want to prevent it rather than to fix it, right? What would be some of the solutions that could help in terms of advocacy, awareness, or even technological solution that you have seen or heard about?
Well, when it comes to suicide prevention and resilience, one of the things they very much have in common is that the top protective factor is a support system. That is the difference maker in all of these cases. There's nothing stronger to predict someone is resilient or maintains their safety than their support system. So I think that's where naturally the efforts need to be placed. And it speaks to the scenario that Mark was describing when on vacation, that clearly that caregiver needed support to help understand and help her child. She also clearly needed to address her own wellness. Even though being on vacation, she still clearly like that's not enough if you're just saying, I'm going to just change my surroundings, because we know, we walk into every room that we're in with ourselves. So a lot of it is around supporting caregivers and then supporting the actual person themselves of what they're going through. And that also leads to the conversation we were having earlier about how do you approach limit setting with screen time and taking a reactive approach versus an empathetic and curious approach. Because when a person feels seen and heard, when they feel truly validated, then they're not going to believe that they're alone. And people that die by suicide don't die because they truly want to die. They die by suicide because they can't see a way to live. They have a difficulty seeing any type of hope or thinking that they are able to overcome what they are going through in that moment. So if we can ensure that people do not feel alone and feel truly heard and seen, then that's going to be incredibly protective. Not to mention, it will allow for more nuanced approaches to support that person and have the needs met in a customized way, and not just a blanketed approach of expecting one size fits all.
I love that, Steve. And, that's one of the reasons we're trying to build both communities, right? So we're creating communities, we're creating dialogue, and also we have, in terms of addiction or in terms of mental health, we do believe that accountability is very important, right? So to have people that you can say, hey, I'm going to live for this reason. I'm going to change this behavior for a reason. And it's a positive one, because relationships are actually what we're seeking: connection, approval, safety, worth. And there is some very good things we can do with this awareness of creating those constant support system. And we could even use technology for that. We can create these opportunities to connect virtually. We talked about telehealth, right? So how can we have someone that is feeling alone still have someone that they can reach, even if they're in a different city, because they feel heard by someone like that? Have you had some example from your patient population that telehealth was useful?
Absolutely. And I can speak to telehealth, not just from an experiential standpoint of my own, but also, again, what the research is showing is that it is nearly just as an effective intervention as in-person treatment. Now, obviously, we want it to come with, ideally, like a level of a hybrid nature, especially in regards to like the very first evaluation or significant medication considerations. But overall, it's an excellent intervention. Also, considering we started our conversation discussing the gap between the supply and demand for treatment, it allows treatment to come to you, so to speak, as the patient through telehealth. So, and I know there's a lot of advocacy efforts going on throughout the country and the state where I reside, New Jersey, for mental health parity when it comes to telehealth. As far as my own experience, I did my training at the University of Michigan, and part of that time involved being a part of a cognitive behavioral therapy clinic where I met a patient when at that time she was about maybe like 15 years old or so. And she was someone that was labeled as a difficult patient. And what it turned out as I got to know her was that she just felt very much dismissed and invalidated as a child and as a teenager. When she would be going to her appointments, she felt like the providers would be taking her parents' word or description of things at face value and would not look to corroborate anything with her, but then not vice versa, that if she expressed her concerns, it didn't seem like there was any effort to obtain information to support it. So I was someone that she really clicked with and connected with, and she made some good progress. But then I completed my training and returned to New Jersey, and it was about a year or so after I had returned to New Jersey that family was able to track me down and express that they felt like there really wasn't a match since we had left, and I had maintained my licensing in Michigan. So I agreed to start meeting with her again, and I have been working with her on a weekly basis for teletherapy, and she is thriving. It is one of the most gratifying professional experiences I've ever had in my career. We even wrote an article in the American Academy of Child Adolescent Psychiatry news magazine together detailing her story and her journey. And if it wasn't for telehealth, it wasn't for teletherapy, it's hard to say where she would be. I'm not going to completely speak for her, but I think it would be safe to say she would have a hard time believing she's in the place that she is right now in her life, thanks to teletherapy.
Thanks for this specific poignant story. And, we also have a telehealth, telecoaching, teletherapy platform, which are impacting, I have clients in Europe. We have clients everywhere, and having the right fit, and I've been told, yes, I had the psychologist or psychiatrist or this before. I've had 3 or 4. And once you have the right one, now it could be anywhere in the world. And that's really an important factor, that you have more choice and that you can build that relationship. Of course, ideally hybrid, especially if there's medication, but there is so much more support than this bogged down of waiting lists, right? You need a psychologist today. Well, wait a few weeks, months, we'll see, right? And that's where some of those kids and youth can fall off the craft, right?
And you make a great point about the fit. We know that the rapport, the therapeutic alliance, is an essential predictive factor of progress and improvement in treatment. And when you juxtapose that against the wait list and the wait times, someone can feel fairly stuck because I don't have an option. This doesn't feel like a good fit, but I don't have any other option. And this is better than nothing. Whereas, as you mentioned, with telehealth, you have the opportunity to expand that network and find the right fit, because that is an absolute difference maker when it comes to a patient making progress in their treatment.
Great. So talking about your specific case, I remember, I think that, went to university, and this week I was interviewing some new people to join our team, which one of them was for many years counselor and therapist in a university here, and dealing with students, especially in the health science, because there's more stress in the medical and health science field, and literally seeing hundreds of patients a year and seeing the stress that university students, college students can have. Do you want to talk a little bit, Steve, about the switch from high school to college? And then Marc also has dealt with a lot of unmotivated university students that he can share some of the stories as well.
Yeah, no, I'd love to, because it's such an important time of life, not just for the person that is transitioning to university, but also obviously for the family as well. One of the things I say about teenagers is that they are experts on not appreciating the idea and reality of something, and that they have lived long enough to have life experience that has them semi-informed, but not lived long enough to realize they're only semi-informed. So that type of transition comes with an immense amount of autonomy and independence. And if you're not preparing a child earlier on to be their own decision maker, then you're not putting them in the best position to succeed. And so that talks about how our theme of being intentional in the approach to helping kids and teens get their needs met and being prepared for the future. But it also speaks to, again, let's talk about the reality of it. What's the reality that comes with that level of freedom and autonomy, and those taboo topics like sex and drugs and alcohol, and not as taboo now, but then like completely no restraint on screen time, like these types of things. If you are not having open and honest conversations, if you're not willing to have the hard conversation, then you're saying that the distress I, as the caregiver, feels about talking about this is outweighing what is truly best for my child and our family in the long run. And I think it's incredibly important that we're willing to have just real judgment-free conversations, because you want to understand how does your child think? How does your child make their decisions? And how does that then translate to when they go on their own? And then it's also just some practical stuff, Christian, like, do you know how to do laundry? Do you know how to access public transportation? Just being able to navigate the things that maybe kids and teens at that point were taking for granted. And they don't have their, what moment now that it's all on them.
Thanks, Steve. And Marc, do you want to share some of the struggles you've seen with university students?
Absolutely. There's been a rise in ADHD, like comorbidity, especially amongst university students who are prolifically or constantly using their smartphones. In my experience, from what I've seen, I want to talk a little bit about the indirect consequences, though, of smartphone use. It used to be that, boredom was the incentive for exploration, to go out, to make friends, to go explore the environment around you. But when you're in a novel environment and there's a lot of uncertain outcomes around you, a lot of strangers, and perhaps you feel overwhelmed with these uncomfortable feelings inside of you. You're no longer living with your parents. You're not in your hometown anymore. You're off to college. The easiest solution to run away from those uncomfortable problems is in your pocket. It's on your phone, right? The accessibility has never been higher than before. It used to be, 20 years ago that those uncomfortable feelings were the impetus to go out and explore, meet people, and actually deal with the source of the suffering. But now it's easier than ever to avoid that problem by going on your phone because, again, phones are ubiquitous. The internet is ubiquitous. And we've somehow fooled ourselves that the internet or social media supplants this real need for human connection. And it doesn't. It actually alienates people much more than ever. And I think that's a big reason why we're dealing with a lot of these comorbidities like anxiety, depression, ADHD, especially when they're coupled with prolonged phone usage. So, and there's been a really strong correlation amongst my patients and these symptoms from what I've seen so far.
You make some excellent points, Mark. Like that is so the case, because you can't build resilience without having to overcome things. You can't build distress tolerance without being distressed. And we know that from a behaviorism standpoint, people do things to get what they want or avoid what they don't want. And when you, like you said, you have easy access to avoid, and then it's effective, there's not much reason to keep on doing it. And a common refrain that my patients hear from me is, I don't blame you. Like, it's very normal to want to avoid something that's uncomfortable. But then the question is it giving you the results that you're looking for? Is that approach to addressing that uncomfortable feeling actually effective? And like you said, people are great at fooling themselves and rationalizing that it is, when the reality is it clearly is not. I love that take.
Sorry, I just want to add one point. On the other end, you have some of the brightest minds of our generation and around the world working at these large tech companies to make this technology, these algorithms, as addictive as possible. These algorithms, in a certain sense, they know more about the people than they perhaps know about themselves. They know exactly what type of content to show at which time to keep them engaged, check off those metrics that they're looking for: high engagement, high retention rate on these platforms. And this makes it even more difficult. We talked about support networks, but at the end of the day, a lot of these people are fighting against these algorithms, these addictive platforms on their own. And it's them against these companies that are engineering addiction. So it's extremely difficult battle in a sense. And then they're fooling them that the solutions, right, are just more likes, more swipes, right? And so it's a recursive, it's a vicious cycle that just keeps causing these people to be deeper and deeper in the problem. That's all I wanted to say.
You can't address something if you're not aware of it. And so just you saying this, it's so important to raise that awareness that it's not just you versus the algorithm. It's who is behind all of it. Like that is such an important message to convey, because otherwise you're not going to think, you're going to be none the wiser. And like you said, that when the blind spot that we have to ourselves, that everyone has, there's always that part of, I don't know what I don't know. Those algorithms, they do. And they're going to prey upon it. So it's so important that we find ways to address that. And for me, it's hard to I need to find the ways that money talks, because unfortunately that's the reality, that it is monetarily incentivized for these companies to do those things. So how do we speak the language in money to actually do what is healthy for people?
Well, we can try to build sustainable and compassionate organizations that can make money, but have different goals than just monetary values. That's what we're trying to do. And we're not alone. We have partners. We have a lot of people in the field saying we can do better as a society. We can do better as organizations and as human beings, individuals as well, right? So there is hope. There's not just the all-encompassing algorithm. There are beautiful conversations like today. Now, I wanted to highlight two things from your talk. One is the avoidance, right? So you both mentioned how avoidance strategy is effective. There's a reason for it. And it's not just because you have an avoidant attachment style. If you want to look at the attachment theory, it is an effective strategy for everyone. Procrastination, everyone does it. It's actually healthy. There's a curve where you want to have a little bit of procrastination and a little bit of distance, and then you don't want to have too much. So it's never black and white. The thing I would say is that aversion is probably the worst thing you want to do, because you want to live life and build that resilience, right? You want to seek rejection and challenges that are healthy and not overwhelming. And you want to have more positive reinforcement. And when we're talking about what's missing for a lot of the youth is a sense of purpose and meaning, right? So they're feeling isolated. They're comparing themselves on social media with people that are either fake or that they're just one out of 0.1%. And then they feel bad about this. And then they don't know what they're going to do with their life. Are they going to be an influencer? Are they going to be an AI engineer? Are they going to be a doctor? But how difficult is that when every few minutes I have to check my phone, right? So all those things are making it difficult for people to have a higher purpose, to have a different mission that they can be focused for a longer amount of time, right? So we know that attention span has been really going down. People can't read anymore, can't read long articles or full books. They use resumes or ChatGPT to tell them what it is without like going deeper, without checking the references. And I think those are things that, parents and society, teachers can be involved in re-educating the fact that, yes, we can use technology, but we can also use our cognition. We can also better regulate our emotions.
Yes, I, again, fully agree with you. And again, aversion being the key word, especially when you're a child's at an age that they're looking for purpose, that comes with a lot of egocentrism that is developmentally appropriate, where they feel like they're on the stage. They feel like they're the main character all the time. So it then leads to a very large aversion to fail and not wanting to even put yourself in that position to fail. And we know that the reality is that failure is a teacher. Failure is a mile marker. It shows you how far you have come, how far you still need to go. There is value in failing. But when a child is concerned that a failure is an endpoint and defines them, then it's no longer in their risk benefit analysis for, in their brains. It's not worth it. And I think, you talk about how ChatGPT, how AI doing some of the work that is preventing from obtaining skills that would allow someone to have more introspection and thought-provoking conversations. We also know that things like ChatGPT or like these chatbots, they more or less fuel narcissism, for really like lack of a better term. They're going to tell you what you want to hear and make you feel great and give you a lot of external validation, which of course, again, everyone needs support. Everyone needs positive words. But if your perspective or thought process has significant distortions in it and it's impacting your ability to function appropriately, then obviously you're just further reinforcing something that is negative, unhealthy, and at times pathologic. So important that, again, we are aware that ChatGPT is not a therapist. It's not a place to be able to figure yourself out, because it's going to put a mirror up in front of you, but it's going to make you look like you're the best thing in the world. And we know that we all come with our flaws and areas for improvement.
Thanks for pointing that out, Steve. Yes, it was one of the criticism of ChatGPT 4. They didn't do much more in the 5. But as you mentioned, and that point cannot be more important, no, you don't want someone that's a yes man. If you're looking at the big 5 personality, ChatGPT would be super agreeable, right? But you want some challenges. You want someone to say, well, maybe you can think about this differently. Maybe we can explore this further. And challenges and failures, I'm glad that you mentioned that to your parents and youth, that failures are part of life and are important to bring resilience and character and being able to deal with the many things that's going to happen in life, right?
That's why it's fairly common that my patients in the beginning of a hospitalization, they're not my biggest fan, but by the end of the hospitalization, there's really strong rapport built there, because I talk to them like people, not like kids. And I tell them, I would rather tell you the truth that is upsetting and distressing and then support you through that and work through that than basically be complicit or enabling the concern. So I have this tendency to put the objective mirror up against them and have them really have to confront how their decision making is not leading to their desired outcomes. And if you want different results, you have to do things differently. Simple in theory, difficult in practice. And that's why then it's the job of people like us and other people working in mental and behavioral health to be the guide, to get our people and patients and clients to living the life that they want to live.
Well, thanks for doing the hard work and being able to be disliked. We liked you, Steve.
Yeah. They are definitely no Chat GPT to me. I get whatever the opposite is tends to what I initially get back when no good deed goes unpunished in those early days of hospitalizations.
Yeah, and we talked about this, I think, the last time we chatted, in terms of the idea that some therapists are a bit too soft and just wanted to placate and go into like deep history and trauma, and you're a victim, and yes, we'll support you. But, you know, to really change your behavior, to change your mindset, to change your attitude towards life, you need to be challenged in a positive way with someone who knows what they're challenging you to do. You know, not challenging you to do something antisocial, actually the opposite, and then seeing what that could do. It takes time, right? So you have to go through the discomfort, to the distress, but eventually, like you said, eventually they like you, right? So that's good.
Because challenging and being empathetic and supportive, like it's not mutually exclusive. They're allowed to be held at once. You can appreciate someone's trauma and how unfair and undeserving it was, and how it, how it impacted them. But then the true empathy is that impact and the way they've been dealing with it is not giving them the life that they want to live. So yes, I say to my patients, I think one of the most unfair things about trauma is that it's unfair that it happened to you, and then you are the one required to then do the most work to overcome it. If it was truly fair, the thing that just happened to you and changed your life, then something else would just happen to you and make it all better. But just because that's not fair doesn't stop it from being the reality. So we can either continue to live in this unfair world and do nothing about it, or we can address things in a way where it doesn't feel fair, but at least it leads to healing and growth and progress. That's
why I love ACT or ACT as a therapy, because you have to accept, right? And the feeling of injustice is actually in neuroscientists from the insular complex, right? So everyone feel injustice, but if you really think about it philosophically, life is not fair. You know, you're not promised to be here. You're not promised anything. And the sooner you can accept that, the sooner you can act, right? So action and toward those goals.
Absolutely.
I have two comments, actually, Steve, for you. So what contradicts, I fully agree with everything you're saying. You know, this tough love therapy approach is the best way to go. And compassion and being stern with patients are not necessarily mutually exclusive. There is a fundamental problem that I see in especially in the US, with the profit incentivization model of modern therapy being, if patients pay their therapist, there's actually an incentivization to hold on to the patient as long as possible. Thereby, let's focus on the problem and draw it out as long as possible so that the provider can actually get as much bang for the buck as possible, right? And I think Abigail Shriver actually talks about this in her new book, Bad Therapy, being that modern therapy in a lot of cases focus more on the problem, right? That people have experienced, the trauma that they've experienced, rather than the skills that they can build to overcome that adversity, right? So that's the first point that I want to make. The second point being, I'm really glad that you brought up AI. It does have a sycophantic tendency of just agreeing with everything that people say. I think South Park recently parodied this as well. But we talked about the accessibility problem of therapy, right? A lot of people can't afford to go to a therapist, a good therapist at least. And they turn to AI, to ChatGPT, because it's free, right? And they start using it. And then AI, will give perhaps some good suggestions, but will also agree with a lot of what the person is writing in there. And we've had cases like what happened a few weeks ago with, I think it was a boy out of Florida who committed, and now OpenAI is getting sued by the parents because of ChatGPT basically agreed with this boy, this suicidal ideation, and encouraged him to actually carry out this act, unfortunately. So on the one hand, we have sycophantic AI who says, yeah, of course, everything is unwilling to disagree. And then on the other hand, you have therapists who are unwilling to disagree because they don't want to risk losing their clients, right? So there's two of these factors that are just exasperating the problem in a certain sense, right? So I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Certainly. So yes, we're absolutely on the same page when it comes to the AI and great use of Sycophant. That's a fun word to say with them. And then when it comes to the therapist, I mean, maybe I'm naive. I would like to believe that most therapists aren't conscientious that they're doing that it's not done with malice and intention to draw out someone's suffering for their own monetary gain. I would like to believe that would not be the type of fabric of someone that chooses to pursue that profession. But with that being said, just because they may be well intended doesn't mean that that's not happening. And I mean, my initial response to it is we've been talking about that there's such a large gap of supply and demand. Like, if you heal your patient, if you get to the point where they're okay, like there's going to be someone else that needs your help. I tell my patients, you know what the number one goal of coming to the hospital is? Leaving the hospital. You want to know what's the number one goal of coming to the doctor? Not needing the doctor. No one wants to have to need a therapist or a doctor. Even if they're in the position that they really want one, they don't want to be in the position to really want one. So I think, again, speaks to likely the importance of raising awareness and likely in supervision for therapists and doctors themselves because to me, I feel like we're talking about blind spots. It almost reminds me of the algorithm conversation from earlier. Like they know you better than you even know yourself and may not realizing that that's what you're doing. But there's always going to be someone else that needs help. So I wouldn't hesitate to allow a patient to graduate because that's what we're here for, I'd like to believe.
Well, good point. And I do, I'm sure that you do, and most of your colleagues are doing that, is just to raise that flag in terms of, you hear there's this book that Mark mentioned, but, you hear just through the grave, yes, I've had a therapist for 3-4 years, right? And like, that's not be a good thing, right? You should try to figure things out before. And of course, there's some difficulties. And if you do need a therapist for 30 years, that's great. But that should not be kind of the standard of, hey, let's have this relation. We have this good therapeutic alliance so that we can just feel comfortable and not move forward in the things that we need, right? So a bit more goal-oriented outcomes would help the patients and also the system, as you mentioned, to be going to the next and helping someone else that needs it.
Fully agree.
Any closing remarks? We're coming close to the hour mark. First, and Steve as well.
I guess I have a quick question for you, Steve. Given your experience in the fields, there's an interesting conversation, being had right now about the overlap between ADHD and addiction. And I would love to hear your thoughts on whether you see a correlation in the rise of ADHD cases that you've been seeing and the preponderance of technology use.
I'm not one to pontificate, so I can I'll offer briefly that since I primarily work with kids in crisis, there's usually many confounding variables in doing short-term acute stabilization before I can really feel confident about am I seeing truly discrete ADHD and how that connects. Theoretically, I think it makes plenty of sense, especially from a neuroscience standpoint and what we see that are the most effective medication treatments for ADHD and what they look to do. So I'm going to defer to speak on it because I honestly feel like, Mark, based on your work, you probably are more well equipped than I am. Maybe if I was in an outpatient setting, I could speak more to it, but experientially, it's something that just to me makes sense in theory, but I'm not necessarily living it on a daily basis in my work.
Thanks, Steve. And is there, in an ideal world, what would be kind of the improvements that we can do in youth mental health in the next 5 or 10 years? What would be some of the things we should focus on?
I think it's primary prevention of education, of understanding. We know that anxiety disorders age of onset is in latency school years. Age of onset of mood disorders are in early adolescence. So raising that awareness, knowing what that looks like, knowing when things are different, and then how to connect people with it. And then it's breeding resilience, self-efficacy, internal locus of control, like the ability to, there's so many things to blame in this day and age and look towards and wanting to control the things that we wish we could, but we can't. and then minimize, discredit, ignore the areas in our lives where we still do have a lot of power and control. So I would look for a general approach of teaching youth and people in general, don't give your power away. Like, own what you still can do. And that is to be honest, objective self-reflection, identify what you want that you don't have, and then be willing to put in the work to take the steps to achieve that. And ideally that also incorporates just appropriate communication with people, and not, relying on a screen to be the conduit for human connection.
That's great, Steve. And thanks for doing the work with your patients, with the communities, with all the organizations that you're involved, and the speaking engagement that you're doing. Thanks for being here with us. It's really a pleasure and privilege to work with you and to have this talk. I would add to what you said that, there is, in terms of education, thinking holistically, right? Let's not forget schools. Let's not forget parents. I think that parents, a lot of parents tell us, well, there is no good parenting book. We don't know. We don't know how to raise kids, and now it's changing. So what's the AI? How were we parenting? Right. So, I think parents are also arguably allowed to not know what to do, and to ask for help, and to create communities that can find the best tools for them in the community to have a support. And a lot of them are overwhelmed, right? So as you mentioned, we're not blaming people to give their phone as a pacifier because they're busy, but we just want to make sure that we can have this dialogue and create not just the phone, but the holistic approach of, is the person, somatically not sleeping and insomnia, and how is that affected with others? So mental, physical, and education awareness is definitely what we're trying to do. And thanks for being part of that with us today. Mark?
My pleasure. Thank you so much for the conversation.
Mark, any last words?
Thank you so much, Steve, for joining us and for the work that you're doing. I think there's a lot of work ahead, from the providers and from the patients on this. It seems like a beast that we're taking on, right? And we're fighting against industries, right, that are gaining immense profit from this. But there's a lot of hope in the work that you're doing, right? And all providers that are providing support for the patients that are in need. Sure.
Likewise, how do you eat the elephant one bite at a time? And it's even just conversations like this that I consider a bite. I'm very appreciative of the work that you guys are doing and your mission and vision.
Thanks again, Steve, and thanks for everyone who joined live. I know we answered one or two questions. Hope that you had some help, anyone that had high school students going to college this or next year. And also just wanted to, thank Steve and Mark for the great talk. Always a pleasure to meet you guys. Anyone that's watching after, if it's not live, we can still be connected. You can follow us on our socials, LinkedIn, YouTube, and the rest. We have a website. We have free resets every Tuesday. Make sure to check us out, engage with us. We'd like to host other people that are interested, and definitely would love to have a chat with you, Steve, in a few months to see how things are going with you.
That sounds great. I'd love to.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good day.
Take care. See you guys.
Bye, Steve. Bye, Christian. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.